Captains of Industry is brought to you by the new BMW X5.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. Today we speak to the Chief Executive of Telematics, a well-known JSE-listed firm, and the Chief Executive is Stefan Joselowitz. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gugu.
Going forward, I think I'll refer to you as Jos, as mentioned earlier,
Perfect.
just because I understand it is a change to your surname. But I want us to explore the 23-year-old you. I understand that you are a serial entrepreneur and you regard a failure that you had in the hospitalities industry in South Africa as one of the biggest lessons that you've ever learned. Why?
Wow, that's going back a while. A little fast food restaurant in Braamfontein many years ago, and I always wanted to be my own boss. Finished studying engineering and worked as a sales rep for a while and for an engineering company, and then decided I was going to give it a go, and the banks were happy to lend me money at that stage at an exorbitant interest rate, I might add. It was really in the 80s, and I decided to take it on and didn't know much about running a business. And I guess the one advantage of the restaurant business is, as an owner, you get to handle everything in the business on a daily basis. So, I was exposed to sales, customer interaction, stock control, what was happening in the kitchen, the hospitality, and of course the most important side of it was the cash flow and having to meet the obligations at the end of the day. And it wasn't my proudest moment, by the way. So
what happened?
Call it, primarily the circumstances weren't great, but mainly my own fault, inexperience, and I guess not having a close enough handle on the cash flow and trying to meet the bank's obligations. Eventually, under what I considered at the time to be a mountain of debt, it wasn't working as planned, and sold the business. So it certainly wasn't a success story, and it took me a number of years thereafter to dig myself out of that hole, so to speak.
Sure.
Even considered declaring bankruptcy at one stage, and I owed a couple of 100,000 rand, and I know today, to me, it's maybe less of a big deal, but then it was a huge pile of money, and
especially at that age.
At that age, and my dad said to me, it sounds like a mountain today, but you're going to look back in 30 years' time, and you'll realise it's not worth throwing your name away for that amount of money. Work and make a plan to pay it off and get on top of it. Don't go bankrupt. And I took his advice, and it was a hard couple of years, but it was great advice. And but most importantly, I learned the basic elements of running a business. So the next
And what
time,
were those, perhaps? Because we're looking back at your dad's words do ring true today. We're looking back, and it's not a mountain; it's a molehill, as a matter of fact. But what were the key lessons that you picked up from that?
I guess lesson number one is know what you don't know, and really what I didn't know was the financial aspects of the business, and maybe what I should have done is what I did in all my following business ventures. First thing I did was get a great chief financial officer, or an accountant, a financial director to back me up. So somebody was focusing on the elements that I wasn't particularly strong at on a daily basis. So I could focus on the elements that I was good at. Sales, building relationships with customers, product innovation, developing the business, focusing on the top end of the business. And so I guess that was lesson number one. Where you need help, make sure you get help. Lesson number two is make sure you capitalize the business properly. So spend a bit more time looking at how you're going to structure the shareholding of the business, and taking on a pile of debt at the time was interest rates in certainly mid 20%. It's hard to sustain a business and grow with that kind of capital requirement, particularly when you're not getting the cash flow right either. So can't blame anybody else other than myself, but I learned the value of stock control, of making sure that you've got a handle on your inventory, and you're balancing how much you invest in that particular stock, how much you put into sales and marketing, etc., etc.
Well, that is a far cry from where you are today. You the CEO of Mixed Telematics, a well-known firm listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and oddly enough, touches our lives in so many ways that some people aren't even aware of it. Take us back to the brainchild of Mixed Telematics. How did that come about?
Well, so I'd had a bit more experience now, so I was now, I guess, in my mid-30s, maybe, in fact, I'm being a bit generous, my late 30s, and took a view. It was the early days of the cellular network, and I figured if we could find a way to provide a mobile location service off this network, if we could track something off this network, there would ultimately be huge global demand for that kind of service. And really off the back of that vision, we launched what was to become Mixed Telematics, and it proved to be absolutely right.
But your success story didn't start off so powerfully. Obviously, you must have knocked on a lot of doors, and some people might not have believed in this vision of yours. Oh,
absolutely. At the time, the stuff that we accept as standard today, tracking. I mean, we can all track on our cell phones. None of that stuff existed in those days. I mean, all you could do on a phone really was make a phone call. So my kids find it hard to believe, but there was no text messaging. There was no smartphones were still a thing of a far distant future, and I had a concept that if we could triangulate where a cell phone was on the network, we could provide a great service. But to turn that concept into a reality was tough. So in the beginning, I managed to convince enough people to together with a bit of money from myself, put together a proof of concept. So we managed to be able to prove that we could deliver the service, and then put a business plan together. So I put quite a detailed business plan together, and I started knocking on doors. It was a lot of money that we needed to put together. And
how many doors got shut?
Well, I guess this was later in my career. So in fairness, it was easier than other ventures because obviously I'd had some success now in building businesses, and I had developed a contact network of, I guess, some people that had faith in my ability. So it was certainly been much easier than it was when I started a venture when I was 28 years old, when I had to knock on literally hundreds of doors and got hundreds slammed in my face. But really, you only need one. You need one success to get going, and that would be my advice to any budding entrepreneur is that. A lot of people are going to say no, but don't give up. So it was a little bit easier. So I knocked on a few doors, and I had a few shut in my face. I had the first one I called on. In fact, they had an organisation, a listed company I knew very well. They said, what, we like the idea, but it's just too big for us, but we wouldn't mind being part of it if you can put the rest of it together. So there began a journey where, in fact, it took 4 different large companies.
How important was that?
Yes.
I want to push you on that because we spoke to Hubert Brody, the outgoing chief executive of Imperial Logistics, and he speaks fondly of your company and believes that there's such an amount of future growth within the firm that at the moment we can't even comprehend.
Well, that's I'm pleased to hear that. I mean, that's praise from Caesar himself. But in those days it was obviously much tougher because we were inventing stuff. The technology that I was talking about delivering didn't exist. So we had put a proof of concept together, but even the proof was really borderline. I mean, the accuracy was far from what we really needed. But it was.
Could you track a car back then in 30 seconds, or not?
We could. What we couldn't do was we couldn't track it accurately enough for it to be of any practical benefit. So, and therein lies, I guess, the kind of challenges that you need to overcome as an entrepreneur. And so we had an accuracy of a few kilometers, and my brief to the engineers had been, I need this accurate to 50 meters because, to find, they came back all excited and said, well, we can track, we can prove that we can triangulate. So, excellent. So have we met all of the objectives? Well, there's one problem. Accuracy is a bit off. I said, well, how far off? Well, it was a few kilometers off. And of course, you can imagine, okay, well, tell me the vehicle's in Midrand. Well, not okay.
That's
it's
not
better.
practical.
It's better than it's in South Africa. So, but it's still not a narrow enough area to have any practical benefit. And so I then faced the challenge of how I overcame that and overcome that problem, and we solved it really almost by accident, I guess. But I guess that's I was on a safari and up near the Kruger Park, and the one morning the first morning where the ranger said, "What do you want to see?" And I said, "What do I want to see? I want to see a leopard." He said, "Okay," and he pulled out this piece of kit with a funny stick out of the end, and he put some earphones on and started driving by moving this antenna toward. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, it so happens that it's a protected species, and we have this animal has got a collar on that's got a little transmitter on that we can, if we get close enough, we can pick up the signal." I said, "How close do you need to get?" And he said, "Well, within 3 or 4 kilometers." So of course I said, "Where can I get that?"
Exactly.
So we realized if the triangulation could tell us within a couple of kilometers, tell us it's in Midrand, and I could then turn on this relatively inexpensive device, put the two together, we could then pinpoint the vehicle, which is exactly how we started our business.
Just the skills that must be required for such a thing to be pulled off must be, quite hefty, because you're not meeting a lot of engineering students in South Africa who think that far ahead. How did you manage to source the skills necessary in order to come up with such innovation?
Yeah, we mustn't undersell ourselves as South Africans. There's really lots of the pieces that are necessary to build world-class businesses exist all over our country, and I'm really proud that the business we built up, and by world standards, last year we listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which is something I'm in terms of milestones, I'm pretty proud of. Very few South African companies have achieved that milestone. We raised a lot of capital in that process relative to our needs. We raised 65 million or 650 million rand, $65 million. So it's given us a nice war chest going forward for doing more innovations, maybe for doing an acquisition. But the core skills that we needed to build our business were all sourced in South Africa, from all creeds, all cultures, and they're there. We do undersell ourselves as South Africans, but you have to have an open mind, and you have to talk to lots of people, and you have to, I guess, fish where the fish are. So we've put our design center in Stellenbosch, which is right near the university. We did that in the early days, so we had a large pool of students that we were interacting with, becoming graduate students that we would employ, and we still, use those techniques to bring people in.
Well, Stefan, I hope to pick your brain a little bit further on that in just a moment, but we're heading off to an ad break now, where as we return, we will continue speaking to Stefan Joss, the Chief Executive of Mix Telematics. Welcome back to Captains of Industry. This week we speak to the Chief Executive of Mix Telematics, Stefan Joss. Stefan, just before the ad break, we were talking about sourcing skills in South Africa. And you are a proudly South African gentleman. You are based in the States at the moment, but the entrepreneurial environment in the country, do you think we're capitalizing on it enough?
Probably not enough. One thing I've learned in my transitionary phase at the moment, I have moved to the US because we are building a global business, and the board took a view, rightfully so, 5-6 years ago, that if we're serious about that, we've got to think and act and learn how to be global. And over my 5 years in the US, I've learned an unbelievable amount.
What have you learned? Because their failure is worn as a badge for entrepreneurs.
It is, and from my own experience, it's a good thing. Failure is not a bad thing. It's a lot of successful people fall on their face from time to time through their careers. Some multiple times. I've been fortunate that I've maybe done it 1.5 times, but and survived it. But nonetheless, so failure is not viewed as a bad thing there. And in fact, from a capital raising perspective, they view it almost as a prerequisite. So for an entrepreneur looking to raise money, I think funders are probably more prone to advance or to back somebody who's had that experience of failure than somebody who's had an easy run or has never done it before. So because they've learned something through that phase. But there's no doubt that I've learned a bunch of things. So firstly, we are disadvantaged here from an access to capital perspective. It hasn't, although it's easier now than it was when I started my first business in the 80s, access to capital in South Africa is still much more difficult than for a young entrepreneur than it is in the US or in Europe, for argument's sake, and particularly US. So you get guys in Silicon Valley that that leave university and start up something, and they're a billionaire, a year later, and they actually don't have a viable business yet, which is in some instances, which is the interesting part. So South African funders are much more focused on what is your profit, what's the bottom line, whereas the US funders are much more focused on what's the future potential of sales or how many users you can get. Profits will come. They realize that first you need to is it a technology that's going to excite a lot of users, a lot of customers, and then the profits will follow. So initially they're less worried about profitability. So for a young entrepreneur in a startup, you don't have profits, so it's very hard, because the bank, you go to a South African bank, and it's often difficult because, well, show us your balance sheet. Well, listen, I'm 23 years old. I don't have assets. Well, show us your profits. Well, I don't have profits yet. I haven't started the business. I've got a plan. So it's that kind of process that makes it difficult for entrepreneurs. I think it has got easier from those days when I was in my 20s. I think it's got easier, but it's not as easy as it is in the US. So South Africa, we need to up our game, I think, as from a financial institution, a availability of fund perspective to help young entrepreneurs to seed their ideas more, and that's something I'd like to see improve further, and I'd even like to see maybe down the road myself and our organisation play a role in getting better. We do some young business development already in our business, but we need to up our game.
Tell us about that young business development. How far is it, and what exactly do you do?
Yeah, it's relatively early days. So in terms of the service providers that we need in our business, we could source those skills around available service providers. So, for instance, we need installation skills in our business. We could go to an existing auto electrician on the corner, or we could help a young graduate engineer actually get involved in his own business, help him buy the vehicle, buy the tools and equipment that he needs, give him the training that he needs to do it, and then give him the business from us, that the services that we require, that we would pay an established business to provide, get them to provide those services to us. So actually give him, start the revenue stream going, so now he's getting revenue, and once he's getting revenue, it becomes much easier to go to a bank and say, well, I'm already in business, I've got a business, I've got a customer, being Telematics, I've got revenues, I've got accounts, and then it becomes easier to raise money and to take it possibly to the next level. So, but I don't think it's enough. I think
a lot more can
more can be done in terms of real capitalizing real startup ideas. I'd like to get a bit more involved in that in our organisation. Maybe if guys or girls that have got ideas that are maybe aligned to what we do, bring them along, and you never know, maybe we'll be excited enough to put some money into it. So.
It's nice to hear that you're so open-minded. What about the role of education? You yourself are a qualified engineer who has this innate ability to be a serial entrepreneur. How do you link the two up? Yeah,
so nobody can deny that education is vital, and again, we need to be upping our game in terms of what we're doing. However, I don't believe that it's the be-all and end-all of success in terms of starting and building a business. If you ever interviewed my mother, she'd tell you I wasn't the greatest student, so I certainly didn't show myself in glory as a student at school, took things for granted, did things that young guys do, distracted and everything else. But success really comes from drive, having the stayability. So if you've got an idea, stick with it. Don't be put off by the first person who says no to you. And most importantly, learn from your mistakes. You will make mistakes along the way, and as long as you don't repeat them, because that's the cardinal sin. And I've seen that in my own experience with people that I interact with. super smart people who have failed multiple times by doing the same mistake over and over again. And I mean, that's to me is just a crazy approach to life.
And I take it perseverance as well. You yourself kept on going despite the setbacks.
Yeah, so you've got to have perseverance, and of course, not all your ideas are winners. So eventually, I've given up on ideas. So it's not eventually, because you've also got to be listening. So be a listener, because you're taking these ideas to people that have got more experience than you, got more money than you, smarter than you, more educated than you, and listen to their feedback. And when enough of them tell you that it's a silly idea, they're not going to fund it, well, maybe they've got a point. Maybe you've missed something along the line. But when you've got an idea that you believe in strongly, and as I have with not just this business but previous other businesses, that generally the feedback I got was, this is a cool business, but we're not ready to put money in, or the timing's not right for us, or it's not perfect for our industry. But nonetheless, I had enough affirmation that the idea was sound. Stick with it, and eventually, you should be successful.
Let's talk about now. You mentioned that you've just recently listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which is a huge feat for any South African company, especially started on the ground here. The move into international territory, you've got operations in Germany and the US and many other regions. Was that challenging in the beginning?
Oh, it's extremely challenging. South Africa is a challenging environment to operate. So the one thing about South African companies is that we often do well on the world stage, and we're a small example. I look at some South African companies that dominate the industries that they're in all over the world. There's numerous examples which we can go into, and that makes me particularly proud. So South African businessmen get a solid grounding because we deal with issues in South Africa on a daily basis, which the average American never deals with. I mean, the exchange rate that can, vary by 30% in 3 months. It's just by small example. The petrol price that can move all over the place. Strikes, which labor strikes, which aren't a big issue in many other parts of the world or developed world anymore. We deal with all of that stuff on a daily basis, and hence we become very adaptable and very flexible, and that's why South African businesses do translate well globally. But nonetheless, it's hugely challenging. Today we service customers in 112 countries, in 24 different languages, and it was tough to build up that kind of process and infrastructure. But we decided to do it, and we've by no means finished that exercise, but it has given us a competitive advantage, where today many of our customers choose us for various reasons, but one of the reasons is that we can service them. They are global multinationals. We can service them in the US, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Australia, so we can provide them a global service, and a service that was dreamt of and developed in South Africa with South African skills.
So what's the growth path going forward for such a company that has, produced and rather achieved such great heaps and bounds in the past?
Yeah, I think we've really, I know I'm biased, but we haven't even scratched the surface yet. We really are in an industry that's at an inflection point of growth for lots of good reasons. The cost of technologies come down dramatically, so it's becoming more affordable for people to engage in this kind of technology. More importantly, the bandwidth to deliver large amounts of data through the cloud, which we do in terms of our software as a service, is broadening all of the time. In the US, I'm used to having big bandwidth. South Africa, we're getting there. Our internet service is improving, but it's we know what we're aiming for. We need to be like it is in the US, where you want to download a movie, it takes 30 seconds to download an HD movie. And I think we'll get there. But getting back to what it means for our business, we can provide more and more services for a growing global customer base. And there's estimated to be over 300 million commercial vehicles in the world. Only about 4% of them have any form of telematics device in or service, which is what we provide. The research estimates that that's likely to triple over the next 3 to 4 years. So I'm very excited about the growth prospects of Mix. I think the stars are the limit for us, and we've only just begun this journey.
Well, shareholders will no doubt be happy to hear that. But you as an entrepreneur, Jos, you've got such an amazing company in your hands. What keeps you awake at night?
Well, shareholders' expectations is one of them, obviously. So this is not my business. It's I'm a shareholder, and I think and act like a shareholder. But I'm just one of now thousands of shareholders that reside all over the world, and shareholder expectations are often short term. So I guess miss the days of being a completely private business where you can not only think and you can act long term. You're not worried about today or tomorrow or this quarter or the next 6 months. You're thinking about what the business is going to look like in 10 years' time. I still do that. So I still think about that, but at the same time, I have to also remember that I've got to report Q4 earnings in a few months' time, and then Q1 earnings a few months after that, etc., etc. So there are these trade-offs along a business evolvement. So although it's given us access to great capital and it's helped our business evolve, it comes at a price, but it's a price it's a price we've decided to pay. And my role is to balance the shoot for the stars long-term view of the business with the short-term expectations of a lot of our shareholders, and to get that balance right.
Well, we'll be tracking your star rise, or rise up to this level of the stars, and the pun there is intended. And thank you so much to Stefan for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
No, it's been lovely speaking to you. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was Stefan Jos. He's the Chief Executive of Makes Telematics. That does bring this episode of Captains of Industry to an end. So join us again next time where we speak to another Captain of Industry.